Ahoy! With the expansion getting closer and closer, discussion around the pricing has gotten more and more intense. Many people seem to believe that the expansion will be free, while others are certain that it will have a price tag, and we're slowly inching towards the level of "trust me bro, my uncle is CEO at Amazon." So at this point I'd like to weigh in and talk both about if I believe the expansion will be free, and if I believe it should be free. Let's start with the will it be free. The most obvious thought behind the expansion potentially being free is that it would attract a larger number of new and returning players. If you only have to buy the base game, then obviously that's a lot more appealing when it comes to reaching the end game and being like, okay, I don't have to pay anything extra, I have all the content. And as it stands, New World would absolutely benefit from reaching a larger number of players. While Season 2 brought a fair number of players back, we are very quickly inching back towards the numbers at the end of Season 1, which you may recall is what I predicted in my video talking about my expectation for the player numbers in the future. I think we are about to see the biggest drop, then maybe some people coming back with transmog, and then people coming back in anticipation for the expansion. We know that last year Brimstone Sands gave the game a massive boost of returning players. The problem was just that they didn't have enough follow-up content to hold those players, which seems to be different this year. They have another season scheduled afterwards, and they said they have even more lined up for next year. So it would be a very good setup for a long-term future to go with a free model here. The other argument that I'm not making, but I have seen many people make, is that Brimstone Sands was free, so the expansion will be free. And this is actually more an argument for the opposite in my opinion, because Brimstone Sands was specifically not labeled as an expansion, and this is labeled as an expansion, which also seems to come with more significant changes than Brimstone Sands did. Brimstone Sands added an interesting new zone and a few new resources as well as hard runes, but generally it didn't overhaul all too much about the game. From what we know about the expansion so far, there are mounts, there is once again a new zone with a new dungeon, but there seems to potentially also be a level increase, a gear score increase, maybe more than that, maybe even a crafting increase. I talked about that all in detail in another video, but it seems like there might be a lot more happening in general. And if the overall changes and new features are much larger compared to last year, that would also make it more likely that they will charge for the expansion. In the context of this being labeled as an expansion, it's also worth noting how other games in the genre treat expansions. I had a bit of a look around, and as far as I can tell, most major players charge for expansions. On the forefront we of course have World of Warcraft with its monthly fee, and you still pay for the expansion. I think this is, as far as I can tell, also true for Final Fantasy Online. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I found both that you need a monthly subscription and there is also an expansion that you need to pay for. Other MMOs like Elder Scrolls Online and Guild Wars 2 also charge for their expansions. And Guild Wars 2 also shares something with another second game in a series, and that is Destiny 2. Both of these games started as paid games, but eventually became free to play, with the expansions still costing extra. And we know that the New World devs like to take a lot of inspiration from Destiny 2. For example, the transmog system is almost one-to-one the same system. Now, Destiny 2 is under a lot of heat lately with their monetization having gone way overboard, so they will probably be smart enough not to copy everything from Destiny 2, but the general concept of charging for expansions is very established in the MMO community, and the big example that New World seems to use a lot, Destiny 2, does it as well. If Amazon Games charges for the expansion, I could definitely see them take the route of Guild Wars or Destiny 2 later down the road, where eventually, after multiple expansions, they might end up making the base game free. After all, the game was on a recent Steam sale for less than $20 already, so I wouldn't be surprised if the price tag is going away entirely, or what I'm thinking is that they may at some point be moving to having it included in Prime. Of course, if they put a price tag on the expansion, then they will bring less people back and there is less incentive for new players to play, unless they get enough of a reason to come back without buying the expansion, and then just may consider doing that down the line. Generally, especially based on them using the term expansion for the first time, and looking at the rest of the genre, I'm expecting that the expansion will likely not be free and they will charge something for it. How much is another question entirely, and we'll explore that a bit more later in the video in the should they charge section. So, should they charge? Now obviously the argument for them not charging and the game being free is easy to make. It's free, and I like free things. Here's the thing. I recently read some interesting comments about what should be free and shouldn't be free in the game, especially in the context of transmog. Currently, New World is mainly monetized through the base fee that you pay for the game, as well as cosmetics. They recently added the Battle Pass on top of that, so that might be another profit source. I don't know how they stack up, I obviously don't have any numbers, but generally even that ties a lot to the cosmetics because the Battle Pass or Season Pass contains a lot of cosmetics. A not so insignificant number of people seems to be upset that they are charging for transmog. If the main income source that New World has for the most part are skins, then if they didn't charge for transmog, they would be losing a lot of money. Transmog gives you access to all the skins in the game, many of which are arguably better looking than the skins from the shop, so there is much less reason for people to buy the shop skins. So New World is effectively charging for transmog to not cut into its own profits. Now, would I rather have transmog be free? Absolutely. I would also rather have the shop skins be free, and while we're at it, let's make the game free too. Well, little problem here. While that would be lovely, Amazon Games exists in a capitalist framework under one of the most capitalist companies on the planet. In other words, they need to make money to exist. In case you didn't know, here's just a quick visual history lesson on what happens to Amazon games that don't make enough money. RIP Crucible. Sure, New World in particular probably has a bit more leeway now that it's basically also the testing ground for the Lord of the Rings MMO, but still, I don't think they are safe from getting scrapped if they're just not looking like they will make any money. So, going by the assumption that New World is under the pressure to make money somehow, how would you personally like that to be? Here are my thoughts. It's completely okay if yours are different, but this is just my personal perspective. I would much rather see cosmetics be monetized because that is already the standard for the most part. But I also do not want to see cosmetics go completely overboard. The game that I played previously, Smite, had a ton of skins with massive effects and also different audio effects along with that, and it made it super hard to tell who was doing what all the time, and I hated it. Those skins tend to make more money because they're more flashy, but they're also an absolute nuisance for anyone else who has to see them. The Battle Pass, in my opinion, for the most part, falls under the same kind of monetization. That's still mostly cosmetics. That's what you really pay for when you get the Battle Pass, plus a few boosters that most people don't really care about. Beyond that, I don't want to have to pay for anything within the game itself. And I'm going to give you an example of something that I think is terrible monetization here, which is gear set storage. I think that's the worst thing they've done in terms of monetization. That is a usability feature that should never be money getted in the first place, and I don't think that should ever be repeated at all. I bought some of them because as a content creator I do a lot of different things in the game, and I also did a lot of expeditions at the time, so it made sense, but I absolutely hated paying for it. It was something that felt like it should have been free, but it wasn't. But clearly at the time Amazon was not making enough money, otherwise they wouldn't have charged for something like this that was so in demand in the community. It's fortunately going to be less of a big deal once Ward and Bane is gone, but still, I just wish that we never had the issue in the first place. As such, I would much rather see them charge for a large batch of content once a year in form of an expansion than having to pay for usability features within the game. In fact, if they're going to charge for the expansion, they should probably give you some gear slots on top in return as well. But if they charge money for the expansion, it needs to be done right. It needs to reach a higher standard than Brimstone Sands, because it is an expansion now, it's a bigger deal. It needs to be reasonably priced, and that means not more than the main game itself. I know we live in times where Diablo is able to charge more than 100 Australian dollars, which is absolutely ridiculous, but hey, let's maybe not follow that example. And let's also not follow the example of Destiny 2 here and alienate your own player base. I think a reasonable price for the expansion that also appeals to new or returning players would be $20 to $30 depending on how much content it exactly contains. And then ideally you do a sale for the main game at the same time. As I said earlier, it's also very important that there is an incentive for people to play without playing the expansion. If you can get people to come back to New World and test it out a bit, get a feel for the changes and be like, yeah, I like this, I want to get the new content that is gated behind the expansion, that would be good. But in order to do that, you have to change something else that affects everyone. We have a few things on the roadmap here, but I don't know if that by itself is enough. For example, if there are changes to skill trees, then it would be good if those are also implemented to the non-paying players, which seems likely. This is what most games do, because otherwise you have two systems. And that would be something that could make them feel like, okay, cool, I have new changes to my weapon that make it feel different, make it feel better, and now I want to get to whatever, the highest gear score, I want to unlock that, I want to go to the new zone, and now I want to play more, and I want to see more, and I'm willing to pay that extra price. If you force everything behind the expansion paywall, that's gonna be a lot more difficult. We know that other games have taken similar approaches, so this is nothing entirely new here either. For example, in World of Warcraft, as far as I recall, the skill tree reworks were always for everyone, and then, for example, the new class was locked away behind the expansion with the new areas. That would be the equivalent of locking the new weapon in New World behind the expansion, because it is technically a new class. Now, all of this is under the assumption that the expansion offers enough new content to rightfully be labeled as an expansion. If the expansion doesn't feel like an expansion and feels like less than Brimstone, then obviously this would not apply, because why would you pay for something that is less than you got last year? But based on the hints we've seen so far, I am not too worried about that at this point. If you haven't seen those hints yet, I will link a video about that right here. These are just my thoughts, my opinion. Yours may greatly differ. Maybe you're a fan of paying monthly, maybe a big fan of paying for gear set storage. I don't think most people are, but who knows? Maybe there's an outlier. Either way, I've got some interesting stuff lined up over the next days, so if you're interested in more New World, then consider subscribing and clicking the bell. If you'd like to support me further and get early trading tips, you can do so on my Patreon. Thanks to all my patrons who already do exactly that. Thanks for watching. SLOTH out.